All right, you've had plenty of time to get stuff up and going, so. If you missed class yesterday, your video, go watch it. All right.
I shared the notes, so.
Why did you update it?
Update
They
your
don't call
grade,
us back,
but
they wait for you to call.
You called them like
we got
like not with the check. Then I said, I need papers, your email, but you don't have to do it. Well, like you have to do.
Whatever I put it in.
I didn't, and then I thought I forgot that.
No, well, it could be. There was a time where I had like names mixed up, like I was typing and I was like off the person, so I had to go back and change it.
Yeah, I had the red and they're on the page.
There it is.
All right, any questions before we get started?
Your little thing's still up here.
Keep in mind, I want everybody to know that I won't point any fingers, but just because I'm standing up here looking at this screen doesn't mean I'm not watching what you're doing on your computers while I'm up here. It still records in our GoGuardian. I can just click on your name, watch exactly what you do while I'm up here. So keep that in mind while I'm standing here. Okay?
Is your thing gonna go away?
What thing?
I shared it, so now her little name pops up on my.
She's using a voice to talk to everyone. To talk to you. You're yelling.
I'm not
It's
yelling.
disrupting.
I'm trying to get off.
I am. People want to come complain and yell at me about the guys who go home. All right?
I am not the one that.
If you want to come be mad at me, do it. But this is what you're going to get. And you're not going to win. If I have to tell you twice in the same day, I'm just sending you down. I'm done. I'm not the only one that's at this point. So you want to complain about the dress code, see it. Okay?
Figure out a way.
I know. That's why I'm so upset about it. Just enforcing what I ask you to do, because that's what I'm being asked to do. It will be very easy. Seniors, you have 34 days. 34 days. 34 days. Suck it up. Do it. Get out of here. Right? 34 school days. Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead. Let's pick up from where we left off yesterday. The last thing we talked about was the last thing we talked about yesterday was, this is right in front of your faces, hopefully.
However, the state constitution. Talking about state constitution.
We did talk about state constitution yesterday. The very last thing we talked about was how state constitutions and the U.S. Constitution cannot clash. That's what they do. What they do. And what did I say was a way that state constitutions and the U.S. Constitution clash?
What? Can you ask it again, please? Whatever you just said.
You didn't ask, you told me.
What did you say?
About how the state's
What is
constitution.
one way that I said yesterday that state constitutions and the U.S. Constitution clash?
Same-sex marriage.
They used to, they don't anymore.
Marijuana.
We said that they're trying to get around it.
Yes. What about it? We don't have state police. So, for example, you're in Colorado. Recreational marijuana is totally legal there. You're pulled over by a federal agent. You're going to jail for possessing a legal substance within the state. Same goes for Washington, D.C. A district that is totally bound by federal law, but they do have local laws, and their local laws clash totally with the United States Constitution. So what do some state constitutions say about marijuana? It's okay, right? You're allowed to use it. What does the federal government say about marijuana? Not okay. Right? How is this possible if state constitutions simply are not allowed to clash with the U.S. Constitution? What do you think? How can a state amend their constitution in a way that violates federal law? Huh? There's a loophole somewhere? Mac?
The 10th Amendment does make it for states to write federal law. State areas.
Yeah, it gives states the power to make laws and decisions on things, on powers that are not given to the federal government. However, regulation of marijuana is one of those things that the federal government has the power to do. There's one reason and one reason only. We talked about it when we discussed Article 2. Who decides which laws to enforce and which ones not to enforce? For the federal government. Enforce. Laws. We're not passing laws. We're not interpreting laws. We're enforcing laws. Huh? Yes, the president. The president directly decides which federal laws they are going to enforce and which ones they are not going to enforce. And as simply as I can put it, President Obama has said he is not going to enforce federal law on marijuana in those states that have decided to legalize it according to their constitution. What could happen if when a new president comes into office, they want to walk into each and every one of those states, into every legal marijuana dispensary, confiscate everything, and ship everybody off to jail? It's going to happen. They can do exactly that. Everyone will be thrown in handcuffs. Everyone will be thrown in jail. All of it will be confiscated. The money will be confiscated. All of the assets of those persons involved will be confiscated.
How long will they get in jail?
Depends on how much marijuana that store is selling. Right, Becky?
Yeah.
Usually any legal marijuana dispensary has anywhere between 200 to 500 pounds, depending on the size. That's enough to get you a Class 1 felony and to spend the next 25 years of your life in jail.
Getting tied up and getting flown. Put him in jail.
25 years. All right, that's the only exception that currently exists. Another exception that used to exist was same-sex marriage, where the federal government did not recognize, or did recognize same-sex marriage, and certain states did not.
Yes.
Any questions over these things so far? All right, let's talk about characteristics of the Bill of Rights. The Ohio Constitution, which we're going to take an in-depth look at tomorrow when Mr. Lasso comes to hang out with us, is the very first part of the Ohio Constitution. Very first thing, Bill of Rights. Yet another example of the Ohio State Constitution looking extremely similar to the U.S. Constitution. One important thing to understand about Bill of Rights is that Ohio is not the only state that has one. Every single state in the U.S., in their state constitutions, has a Bill of Rights. Does anybody remember England's Bill of Rights? What's contained in it? You're supposed to know the answer to the question, which is that England doesn't have a Bill of Rights because they don't have a constitution. The United Kingdom does not have a constitution. They are only bound by laws that are made by Parliament. Those laws. Another interesting thing is that most of what's contained in the State Bill of Rights is exactly the same as what's in the U.S. Bill of Rights. Why would this be the case? Why would we need the same rights given to us in the U.S. Constitution to be given to us again in our state constitution? There you go. Perfect example. If the federal government, or if the United States were to collapse in any way, which power do we revert to? State. So the state constitutions, for the most part, are protecting our right to have those inalienable rights, which is actually the very first amendment in the Bill of Rights of the Ohio Constitution, that each and every man has inalienable rights and cannot be denied.
Even though the government would still.
We still would be, because we are a confederation. We are not the Confederacy, but we are a confederation of independent states with a national government. So if it were to fall, we would be the United States, but each state would be able to decide what happens. There's no overarching federal government. We would go from a federal system to a unitary system with a bunch of sovereign nations together.
You feel like
Kind of like Europe.
right, if you ever
Other states?
that'd be a good video game.
Collapse of the United States.
Collapse of the United States, and then you have your states, and then like you have to fight the other states. There's like.
I guess my mind goes to potential problems where if that game actually existed and you had people like, we're from Ohio, oh, well, I took you over, kind of thing, could create some animosity between citizens of different states. Especially playing on Xbox. You want to hear 12-year-olds yelling at you to take you out of your state.
That's why I have this one. I don't think.
And another characteristic of state constitutions, specifically the Ohio Constitution, is to cover additional protections not covered in the federal Constitution. Are there any other rights that you would like to see added to the Constitution? At least in the state of Ohio. Anything we should be able, what'd you say, Allie? There you go. I was hoping somebody would go there. So tomorrow, when Mr. Lasso's here, we're going to take a look at the U.S. Constitution, the Ohio Constitution, how they're different, how they're similar, and then your groups, we're going to decide if we need to make some changes. One of those things could be that public schools must allow their students to wear outer coverings when they're full. I say outer coverings, so it includes sweaters, hoodies, and gloves, jackets. Huh? Yeah. Not gonna happen.
This room was talking about how like a couple years ago you used to give $1. He gave personal about, having at least,
I have about this much influence over the dress code. So it would have to be something that you present, I would have to bring it up to a bunch of teachers, and then if every single teacher in the building wanted to do it, there's still not.
well, no,
It's all administrative.
right, she was just,
Jones, the guy who
she was just talking about how like they did it like a couple years ago, and that way nobody complained about it. Now everyone has to comply, and if you didn't, then you're dumb.
Bring it up.
Our teacher told us that we didn't have to have the school logo at the very beginning of this year, and that we could just purchase a all black hoodie. So I don't have a hoodie with a CBC logo on it, because my teacher told us we didn't have to. We could purchase an all black jacket or hoodie, so.
Sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. Anybody work at Kroger?
Kayla does.
Yeah. What do you have to join? What are you required to join? You get a job at Kroger. Yeah. You have to join the union. You wouldn't get it because you're paying for it. It's not a collection and they put it in fund. Union dues don't get taxed. They don't count as taxable. All right. So, what is a union? Anybody know? It could. It protects you against unjust firing. Different things.
Isn't a union like pretty good people who even semi-kids?
Yeah.
Like they-
Okay, so
way of thinking.
like we have a teachers union here. So basically, every teacher that wants to be a member pays a certain due, and we are a union. So then, as a union, collectively, all of us bargain for whatever benefits we get. So instead of me walking in and arguing for my individual salary, my individual benefits, all that, every teacher in the building gets the exact same benefits. So it's called collective bargaining. That's what unions do. It also protects people from getting fired because they said something that their boss didn't like. So like they have different political views from the person that's in charge of firing them. They can't just fire them because they have a different viewpoint. Union would protect them. It also protects you, like if I were to do something really stupid, I don't know, and there would need to be legal counsel involved, then the union would pay for a lawyer in my defense.
Even if you were wrong.
Even if I was wrong.
What's something stupid?
I like steal money from the school, or
I have an agreement. Maybe I should-
start ripping off curse
Dude,
words and
she was
showing
my
everybody
teacher
how
in high
much
school,
they
and
are.
now she's
That would
on
be a
drugs
bad
all
idea.
the time. She was on drugs.
Yeah, man.
Years ago, we had, I think it we're teachers got fired. They went like all these big debate and board of the school, big convention. Because they had different viewpoints and principal got fired. He's a good dude.
Are you talking about
Then
Mr.
he joined the Marines, or, no, the Army as an officer. So he went on. He's really cool. Thought that was kind of unfair. And then after they fired him, like 3 or 4 other teachers left. Because they had different points.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've told you we have modified First Amendment rights in schools. You're not allowed to express religious beliefs. You're just not. I can't stand up here and tell you what I believe or religion. You can't stop me from practicing my religion. Like at some point in the day, if I were a part of Islam, if I were a Muslim, I would pray at certain portions of the day, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. But me being evangelical and saying you should do this, and if you don't do this, you are whatever, that's crossing the line. Does that make sense? Same thing goes for everybody here. You're not allowed to be super pressured. You can create a club, you can invite people, you can hang out, you can pray, can't stop you from praying. But what you can't do is force people to pray, or force people to listen to what you have to say. You can't do that. All right? One thing is interesting about this union part, though. Mariah, were you allowed to not be in the union and work at Kroger? So if you want to work at Kroger, you're required to join the union. If you don't want to be a part of the union, guess what? You can't work at Kroger. Doesn't sound like a bad deal until you begin to understand that every 2 weeks they take like $45.
If they don't take it like 1 week, they'll double it next.
Yeah, so like if you don't make money for a certain pay period, they take double the next pay period, or however many pay periods. You pay it.
$60 a week.
I think my union dues are like $700 a year that you have to pay. But other than that, you don't have a job, right? Now there are a lot of good things that unions do, but one thing that's always controversial is being required to join a union to work there. Is that fair? How many of you think that's fair? Because unions are not the company themselves. Like, the union that is at Kroger is not run by Kroger. You know who it's run by? No? So our union is like the Ohio Educators Association. We're totally separate. We come together as an organization and argue for whatever, certain contracts, benefits. So there is an independent organization that's requiring you to join and pay membership if you want to work for a separate organization. Now that I put it that way, how many of you think this is totally fair?
I know they ask you before you get the job.
Yeah, they're pretty open about it. They say, hey, you have to join this union if you want to work here. It costs this much. You get this benefit, you get this benefit, you get this benefit. Right? Kroger pays pretty decent though. Right? Is it worth the extra money to have to pay that fee to be a part of the union?
It depends on how much you're making compared to you.
Right.
Depends on that raise.
It all depends. It's called cost analysis. Is it worth it? Now let me put it this way. You do something stupid at your job and you don't have a union. Who's paying for your lawyer? Are lawyers more expensive than $60 a week?
Well, yeah. $60 for 5 months.
There you go. Now, some of you are probably saying, well, I just won't do anything stupid. Good idea. I would follow that advice. However, sometimes you do stupid stuff and you don't realize it. Okay? Anybody have any other questions about unions? Joining? Here at CTC, we do have a teachers union, but teachers are not required to join. But what they are required to do is pay a certain portion of their income, whether they want to or not, even if they're not a part of the union. Does anybody know why they would do that? Because they still get the collective bargaining. They still get paid the same as whatever the result of the collective bargaining is. They still get the same benefits. They still get the same time schedule. So some of that good or service is still being produced and provided to them, even if they're not a part of that organization. Okay? Length. The U.S. Constitution has about 7,000 words. What?
I was just gonna, I was wondering if you were gonna have the board to do that, because I didn't want to lie.
Yeah, it's just something weird happened and it didn't show up. U.S. Constitution has about 7,000 words. It's extremely short. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about the U.S. Constitution. India has about 30,000 pages. It's pretty long. So the U.S. Constitution, preamble, articles, amendments. Average length for a state constitution, more than 33,000 words. By show of hands, when I ask this question, how many of you think the federal government has more power than state government? Raise your hand if you believe that the United States government has more power than states do. Raise your hands, please, so I can see it. The vice versa is going to be, how many of you think states have more power right now than the federal government does? Right? Mac, why do you think states have more power than the federal government?
I don't know, it's kind of a, it's a hard debate because it's kind of a different power. Because the federal government actually have the supreme power, so actually they can override state government. But states probably have more influence than the federal government over specific locations. You know what I mean, based on their needs. I don't know, that just kind of seems right to me.
Good? Hey, Becky. Why do you think the federal government has more power than the state government? Huh?
I said, because they can do it, they can override stuff or whatever else you were talking about. Like, if they wanted to about the whole entire weed thing, they can go do it, they just don't want to do it.
They could, but why could they do that? Like, for example, if Ohio wanted to make education mandatory only to 8th grade, what could the federal government do?
They could come in and stop it.
Absolutely nothing.
They can't, so the
They
state
remind
has
you
no
though, right,
power.
like with the road thing?
But they could say, hey states, here's $1 million if you require your students to go to school till 12th grade. Now, why can't the federal government go into a state and say, hey, you have to require your kids to go to school for this time? Because guess what word does not appear in the Constitution even once? Education. Right?
But does the word marijuana appear?
Education does not appear in the U.S. Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution is the only thing that the federal government is based on. Now, I know I'm going to ask you to kind of think about this for a second. Amendment 10, we talked about it yesterday, says any power not explicitly given to the federal government in the Constitution goes where? States. So if the Constitution does not use the word education, where does the power for education go? States. And who can override them?
So the state has
that they could
override.
States have more power when it comes to education. Yes. Federal government has more power when it comes to military influence, foreign policy.
I thought we were talking about in general, like overall.
I was.
So which one is it? Because I'm confused.
You can't effectively, I can't give you like, yes, the federal government has more power, yes, the state government has more power.
I hate that question.
Okay? It's all about perception. As far as number of powers go, the states have more.
Yeah, because their constitution's
Right?
even bigger than the federal.
So, why would their constitutions need to be bigger than Danielle?
So that they can have more power.
They have a ton of powers. Their power is unlimited because if it doesn't appear in the federal constitution, they have the power to regulate it, or at least make law for or against it, right? So that results in state constitutions being much, much longer than state or than federal constitutions. Yeah.
So you said there's two different types of like these true.
Well, the federal police are the FBI.
So a federal agent technically can deal with state law infraction, but they were not necessarily state.
Federal agents are not allowed to pull you over at all. Because traffic is also a word that does not appear in the federal constitution. So who is in charge of, it's like when you drive, I remember when I was a kid, the speed limit on the interstates is 55, nationwide. And then a Supreme Court case happened and they said the federal government doesn't have the authority to regulate the speed limit. So it changed and it went state to state. So then Ohio went to 65, Indiana went to 70. So I lived really close to the Indiana border. Whenever we would go into Indiana, my mom or dad would get really excited because they could drive 5 miles an hour faster. Right? Like it was a big deal when I was in college and the turnpike, anybody ever driven on the turnpike? It connects Toledo to Cleveland. I-80, it actually goes all the way over to like Washington, D.C., Maryland, straight across the country over to Northern California. It was 70 miles an hour about 2 years before Ohio was allowed to be 70 miles an hour. It's a big deal. So states are solely responsible for the regulation of traffic laws. So no, you cannot pull you over. However, If a state trooper pulls you over for an infraction and they find out you violated a federal law, they just call FBI. FBI rolls in. They charge you.
Really Montana.
Germany has the Autobahn, which you can drive as fast as you want. Here's something interesting if you want to know. There are certain portions in the United States where it is not illegal to drive drunk. Let me say that again. There are certain places in the United States where you are legally allowed to drive drunk.
Where?
Very sparsely populated states. So Montana is one of those states where an individual is allowed to drive their vehicle by themselves. They're not allowed to have any passengers after they've been drinking, because the likelihood of them running into a single vehicle, they have better odds of winning the lottery. Because they live so far off whatever beaten track. And if they were to get in an accident, who's the only person that's going to die? So it's actually safer to allow them to drive themselves than it is to have somebody drive that same road and come and get them and drive all the way back. Pretty crazy, right? That's why they removed Montana. Oh, no. All right, detail. Some law and constitutions have details covering varied and unusual circumstances of life. Weird stuff. All right, an example of this, the Ohio Constitution states that people have the right to alter, reform, or abolish government altogether. After you're done typing, I'll read that again because it sounds crazy, doesn't it? The Ohio Constitution. There are words within it that we're going to look at tomorrow that say that people have the right to alter, so make any changes, reform, which is just rip out what's there and replace it with something else, or get rid of it altogether. No government. Anybody else think that sounds pretty crazy? You kind of like it? Are you an anarchist, Kristen?
I don't know.
So you're a libertarian.
I just feel like we would look better if there wasn't like government.
Oh, I got what you're saying.
Like if we just kind of lived.
So like socialism, pure socialism, where like one person is able to provide a good service, so they provide it to their neighbor, and their neighbor provides them a good service, and then the other neighbor. You live in a community and you help each other.
A community where we provide for everyone.
It's called pure socialism.
Yeah. That's what I want.
Socialism gets confused as the government has all the control. That's communism. Socialism is the people have all the control. And everything is owned by everybody. Communism, the government owns it all. Regulates it. So that's the minor difference. Why do you think Ohio would want the ability to alter, reform, or abolish its government totally with the people? What if the government gets corrupt? We need to be able to get rid of it. We want people to see if you might get the last of the tomorrow. Everybody's gonna hang out. I don't want to hang out tomorrow. That's not fair, is it?